like Rolls-Royce should belong to a king. It sounds like old money, like a family that never once worried about rent. But the man behind that name once slept in a hammock above a workshop because he couldn't afford a bed. He didn't build the world's most trusted car brand by selling cars. He built it by selling something far harder to fake: trust. This is the story of Henry Royce, a boy who sold newspapers to eat, who never finished school, who almost died more than once trying to build a company that would outlive him by over a century. And it starts, of all places, in a cornfield. Henry Royce was born in 1863 in a small English village, the youngest of 5 children in a family already drowning in debt. When their flour mill failed, the Royces packed up and moved to London, chasing work that barely paid enough to survive. At 4 years old, most children are learning to read. Henry was standing in a cornfield, scaring away birds, because that was a job someone would pay a 4-year-old to do. Then it got worse. When Henry was 9, his father died. And just like that, the last safety net was gone. He took 2 jobs, selling newspapers by morning, delivering telegrams by night. 2 full jobs before he was even a teenager. And still, it wasn't enough to keep the family together. His mother made the hardest decision a parent can make. She sent him away, hoping strangers could give him a better life than she could. Some nights, his only meal was bread soaked in milk. By 14, he'd had 2 years of school in total. On paper, Henry Royce should have disappeared into history. Poor, uneducated, unlucky. Nobody was betting on this boy. But somebody saw something in him anyway. His aunt noticed something the world hadn't. She saw a boy who worked like his life depended on it, because it did. So she gathered what little money she had and bought him something priceless: a chance, an apprenticeship at a railway company. It changed everything. For the first time, Henry wasn't just surviving. He was learning mechanics, precision, how things actually worked underneath the surface. While other apprentices went home at night, Henry stayed, studying tools, practicing, obsessing over details nobody else cared about. Then the money ran out again. His aunt could only afford 3 years. Henry was forced to leave before he'd finished. Most people would call that the end of the dream. Henry called it a start. He took what he'd learned and got hired at an electric company in London, skipping meals just to keep tinkering with parts after hours. He saved every coin he could and paid for his own night classes in electrical engineering. By 19, he was made chief electrician. 19 years old, in charge, after a childhood that gave him nothing. For a moment, it looked like Henry Royce had beaten poverty. Then the company collapsed. And Henry was right back where he started. Except this time, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He wasn't going to work for someone else's company ever again. At 21, with just 20 pounds to his name, Henry convinced a friend to bet on him. Together, they borrowed enough money to open a tiny workshop in Manchester. They slept upstairs in hammocks. They ate the same cheap food for a year straight. This wasn't a story about talent finding an easy path. This was 2 men with almost nothing, betting everything on precision. And it worked. Their doorbells, their motors, their electrical cranes, all built with a level of care their competitors simply didn't bother with. Within 15 years, they had over 100 employees and real, serious revenue. Then, once again, the world moved the goalposts. Massive American companies flooded the market and crushed the prices. Henry's business, like so many others, started to buckle. The stress hit his health so hard that a doctor gave him blunt advice: rest, fresh air, and maybe buy a car. Henry bought one, and he hated it. It was loud, it was clumsy, the brakes barely worked, and instead of just being annoyed like everyone else, Henry did something strange. He got obsessed with fixing it. Henry bought a better car, still not good enough for him. So he took it apart completely, every bolt, every part, determined to understand exactly why it fell short of what he considered acceptable. That's the moment worth remembering. Most people accept this is just how cars are. Henry looked at an entire industry standard and decided it wasn't good enough for him personally. This wasn't a hobby anymore. It was becoming who he was. The same relentless focus that once kept a hungry boy studying tools by candlelight was now aimed at something bigger. And it came with a cost. Colleagues would later say Henry could not simply approve a part and move on. He would return to it again and again, chasing a version of right that most engineers never bothered to look for. It made his cars extraordinary. It also meant he rarely rested, rarely slept properly, and pushed his body long past the point his doctors had already warned him about. So he built his own car, quieter, smoother, more reliable than anything else on the road. He called it the Royce 10. He wasn't trying to build the fastest car, he was trying to build the most trustworthy one. And that difference is the entire reason this story exists. One of his early customers loved the car so much he wouldn't stop bragging about it. And that bragging eventually reached the ears of a man who would turn Henry Royce's engineering into a global legend. Charles Rolls was everything Henry wasn't: wealthy, connected, educated at Cambridge. A car dealer who'd already made a name racing and importing luxury vehicles from Europe, Rolls had one frustration: Britain didn't have its own great car maker. Every brand worth owning came from somewhere else. At first, when a friend told him about Henry's little two-cylinder car, Rolls wasn't interested. 2 cylinders sounded cheap to him, but his friend refused to let it go, and eventually arranged a test drive in Manchester. Henry handed Rolls the keys personally. By the end of that ride, everything had changed. Rolls went home and woke up his business partner in the middle of the night to say he just found the greatest engineer in the world. 2 very different men, one built by hardship, one built by privilege, made it official in December 1904, and Rolls-Royce was born. Here's the part people miss. Rolls-Royce didn't win by being the flashiest or the fastest. It won because Henry refused to let a flawed car leave the workshop. While competitors' engines rattled and broke down constantly, Rolls-Royce cars ran smooth and silent. To prove it, the company famously balanced a glass of water on a running engine, and it didn't spill a drop. Then came the ultimate proof. A Rolls-Royce was driven 15,000 miles non-stop, day and night, for over 2 months without a single mechanical failure. A journalist called it the best car in the world. Rolls-Royce didn't even need to argue. The car had already said it. That's the real product Henry Royce was selling. Not horsepower, not luxury for its own sake, certainty. The confidence that when you sat in that car, it would simply not let you down. And that certainty traveled fast. Word did not spread through advertising, it spread through reputation, one trusted owner telling another. Kings and queens across Europe began requesting the car by name. Heads of industry bought them not to be seen, but because they refused to gamble their time on anything less reliable. In an era when most cars were still a risk you took, owning a Rolls-Royce meant you had removed the risk entirely. That was the real status symbol, not the badge on the hood, but the peace of mind sitting behind the wheel. Real luxury was never about how something looked. It was about how completely you could trust it. But the empire almost lost half its foundation before it had the chance to grow. Charles Rolls, the man who had given Henry's engineering a stage and a name, had another obsession pulling at him: flying. He became the second man in Britain to earn a pilot's license, and in 1910, he completed the first non-stop double crossing of the English Channel by air, a feat that made him a national hero overnight. 1 month later, at an air show in Bournemouth, the tail of his aircraft broke apart mid-flight. Charles Rolls fell from the sky and became the first Briton ever to die in a plane crash. He was 33 years old. The man who discovered Henry Royce was gone before the company had even reached its full stride. It would have been easy for Rolls-Royce to lose its identity right there, to become just another manufacturer with a dead founder's name stapled to the badge. Instead, Henry did the only thing he knew how to do. He went back to the workshop and got obsessed all over again. He carried the standard forward alone, refusing to let his friend's death lower it even slightly. In many ways, everything Rolls-Royce built afterward, the Silver Ghost, the endurance records, the reputation that outlived both men, Was Henry quietly proving that the promise they'd made together would not die with Charles? Henry Royce paid a brutal price for that obsession. His health had already been failing for years, and in 1911, doctors diagnosed him with cancer, giving him just months to live. He didn't stop. From a sickbed by the sea, wrapped in blankets, he kept sketching, kept correcting drawings, kept sending instructions back to the factory as if his body hadn't just handed him a deadline. He lived over 20 more years past that diagnosis, and he spent every one of them the same way, refusing to separate himself from the work even when the work was clearly what was killing him. Even on his final night in 1933, he was still sketching a new design, sending it to the factory before he died. The drawing arrived the next morning. He didn't. The boy who once scared birds out of a cornfield for pennies ended up building a name that, over a century later, still represents the absolute peak of engineering trust. Rolls-Royce was never really about the cars. It was about a boy who refused to accept good enough, a friend who bet his reputation on him and died far too soon, and a promise between two very different men that turned out to be the most valuable thing either of them ever built. That promise is still running today.